And we've come to the end of an era. 14 years of Tory rule, 5 prime ministers, 7 chancellors, 8 foreign secretaries, 13 culture secretaries, 8 home secretaries, and 13 housing ministers. The country is in a worse state than it has ever been. And what alternatives have we got? It looks like we've got a Labour win by a landslide if the exit polls are anything to show by. Is that really the change that anyone was hoping for? I don't think so. What do you think?
I have a lot of thoughts on that. Yeah, I think it's definitely a terrible position. 5 prime ministers. I mean, I don't remember all the statistics and things you've just said, but I like to think of it as the 5 musketeers. You've got going back to David Cameron. If you remember him and a bygone era. Usually, a prime minister, if you take 2 terms, that's 8 years. Try and think where we were 8 years ago. That's 2016. That seems like a million years ago, not 8 years ago.
It
And
does.
since then, David Cameron, Theresa May, Liz Truss, Rishi Sunak, Boris Johnson. Sorry, I forgot him. That's the last 5 Conservative prime ministers that we've had. And I don't know which one is the worst. Okay, obviously Liz Truss is the worst, but that's what we're talking about. That's the legacy. That's how we got to this moment.
I think forever Liz Truss's legacy is going to be she was going to be one of the best answers at a pub quiz forever, which will be who was the prime minister when the Queen died, and nobody will remember her name. Was it Theresa May? I remember it was a woman. Cabbage, something about a cabbage. Absolutely just been of irrelevancy.
Mm-hmm.
If you would choose to not count her, which you could be forgiven to not, the male prime ministers there, they are literally the 4 horsemen of the apocalypse. You had, do you remember the phrase originally, David Cameron's broken Britain? Like you're saying, that feels like a lifetime ago now. The London riots, this was all under his watch. The coalition government between him and Nick Clegg, the protest that started of using the Liberal Democrats as a punching bag. It does seem like such a long time ago, and so long of it, their inability to get anything done was always blamed on the mess that Labour left us, and you can almost see it happening that excuse is being primed already for why Starmer can't get anything done for the next 4 years, and that I suspect that is going to be the case.
Right. I mean,
so I've just had a look now. So we've got some exit polls on because it's 20 past 10 in the UK at the moment here. So I'll see if we can get it on as we're speaking, because it does look not at all shocking. I think this is exactly what a lot of us predicted.
I haven't actually seen it yet myself, so I'm quite excited to see what we have. While you get that up then, Chris, I mean, I'll just mention that, 8 years ago is when the Conservatives, well, not 8 years, sorry, it's been a lot longer than that, but 2016, that was 8 years ago. Just 4 years ago, or 5 years ago, 2019, when we had the last election, that in itself feels like a lifetime ago. That was before COVID, that was before the Ukraine war, that was before the Gaza genocide. That alone just seems like a much simpler time when life was just so much easier. All we talked about was Brexit, and the only thing to think about was Brexit. And 5 years later, some people do still talk about Brexit, but it's barely the talking point of the day.
It does seem like happier times, doesn't it? Like when the only thing you had to worry about was ISIS and Brexit.
ISIS and Brexit. That's it. All we had was ISIS and Brexit back in the old days.
Right, so let's see what we're at the moment.
Maybe not the same level as Conservatives, but close enough. Isn't the problem here that the Tories have
so these are the exit polls, so let's see what level of counting about. Obviously, the counting's only gone up for 20 minutes.
In 2019 has just split apart. So what is the answer now?
410 for Labour.
Do you want people to vote for?
Well, Trevor, I'd love to see what the projected share is as well, because it may well be a horrible sort of inversion of what happened in the 80s when the left and the centre-left was split and the Conservatives enjoyed big majorities. And their choices were made then by the Labour Party to stop veering to the extreme left of British politics and to come back to the common ground. But, John Redwood is right about this. Left and right, isn't really where we should be debating. What we should be talking about is generational politics. And my big big concern is that we did not have a compelling offer to younger, aspirational people who want to own their own home, who want to have a stake in our society, who want to believe in a future that is more hopeful than the past. I don't think we had anything really constructive to say to them, rather than more than steady as she goes, the economy's coming right.
It's basically been the status quo since World War II. We've said this in other conversations that we've had. After World War II, where the Labour Party came to power under Clement Attlee, a lot of British socialists, what we'd call social democrats, this is where they say that this was the best Labour government. This is where we got given our NHS, which we all know was a complete concession, basically to stop us revolting. You know, revolutions all over Europe, and this did mellow down the left in Britain for a long time. But that generation after World War II were the only generation that born in an NHS hospital, went to work in a unionised job, and retired to a good state pension.
Yeah, absolutely.
For it. Ever since that generation passed its time, every government after, whether it be Conservative or Labour, have done everything they can to attack those abilities for us to fight for those things. And now another Labour government coming in, promising us almost nothing. Like, it's hard to get anything out of Starmer of what he actually wants to do.
Yeah, absolutely. I think I've heard different descriptions of this Tory light, Tory diet. The new or current Labour Party under Keir Starmer is almost indistinguishable from the Conservative Party. So this is just people being tired with the Conservatives. They've just had, so many prime ministers, so much time with Conservatives. You could literally, I feel like anyone could have taken them out at this moment. Any Labour leader could have taken them out at this moment. If you could have had, imagine if Jeremy Corbyn was in power right now, he potentially could have been taking office right now.
Yes. And so it's interesting to see what's happening with him, which we're going to find out very shortly, I imagine. So obviously was disqualified from running as a Labour candidate. He announced that he was running anyway as an independent, which automatically suspended him, kicked him out of the Labour Party by doing so. So he's running as an independent. So it's going to be interesting to see how well he does. Like, obviously, his constituency, there's a lot of people who are very loyal to Corbyn who potentially would vote for him rather than a Labour candidate. But obviously, so many on the social democratic left in this country, which is basically the entire left, have this idea of just vote to get the Tories out. All that matters is we win.
Right.
Which it's never been enough for me, really. What is the point of winning if, who are you winning for? It's not winning for me. Just because the party's called Labour, it is definitely not a party of Labour. This country doesn't have a mass movement party of Labour.
Yeah, no, totally. It's true. I mean, yes, you sell. This is always the argument of the center, that you water down your politics, get closer to this quote unquote center, so that you can win elections. But then you win power, and what policies do you have? You have policies that are indistinguishable from the right, basically. Also, just a quick one, talking about Labour leaders. On the Sky News panel there, we just saw him on the screen. That's Andy Burnham. I don't know what happened or why he's on the Sky News panel show and is not running and campaigning and in politics. That's Andy Burnham, who's, I thought he was the mayor of Manchester. Perhaps he's been retired or been sacked or whatever. But this is someone who's supposed to be a contender for the leadership of the Labour Party not so long ago. So I'm curious, I don't know if you know anything further or why he's on a Sky News politics show and not actually doing politics.
Well, he was a Corbyn loyalist for a while, wasn't he? I could only speculate that his wings have been clipped due to sort of control him in the same vein that Angela Rayner did. Of course, Angela Rayner got given a position, but it was very much, in my opinion, I keep your friends close, your enemies closer situation.
Yeah, no, I think
After
you're right.
seeing what Starmer's done, where he has literally purged the party of the left, it's become hostile ground to the likes of you and me. One of my favourite film directors British film directors is Ken Loach, who's done some absolutely amazing films since the 70s about World War One, the trade union movement, and he did that film Daniel Blake about the job centre. Always advocated for socialist politics, strong supporter of the unions, and he was kicked out for supporting Palestine under the charge of anti-Semitism.
Yeah.
So if long-term socialists like Ken Loach could be kicked out of the Labour Party, then there's no hope for it. It is truly the party. It's a return of New Labour that we saw in 1997. This is Blairism.
Yes, 100%. Yeah, I think if anyone wants to get an idea of what's happened to the Labour Party within the Labour Party over the last sort of 5 or 6 years, particularly how they got rid of Corbyn, the Al Jazeera Labour Files is an excellent piece of work that they did, showing how even at the sort of local level, the constituency level, the branch level of the party, they concocted stories of assault, people spitting on each other. It was all made up to push out the pro-Corbyn elements of the party. That sort of more left-leaning social democrat part of the party, as you already explained. This is a party that has been purged of even that sort of very light left-wing politics of just, as you say, secure jobs, secure housing, healthcare and benefits and whatnot, and a sort of a more worker-orientated economy. I mean, only even nominally, only even a touch towards ordinary people's sort of interests and needs. But yeah, this is a hollowed out Labour Party, even on a hollowed out version of something that was already quite hollow or quite light.
Yes, and it will be a hollow victory, I imagine, come the morning.
Absolutely. So I think we want to go into the other parties if we want to see what, because the numbers there and the other stuff. What I'm particularly interested in is the independents, and to see how many independents there are compared to other elections. And also, I mean, obviously the Lib Dems are there. I don't even know the current name of the Lib Dem leader. I haven't really. I didn't really think that was worth knowing. Apparently, maybe it is. Now they're half the size of the Conservatives, so 130 seats and 60 seats. So we're assuming that the exit poll is accurate, which it usually is. I'd say it's not usually more than 10% out. It's usually within 10% of the actual results. So yeah.
No, yeah, you're absolutely right. I own socks that have a longer shelf life than a Liberal Democrat leader. It's absolutely not worth learning the name. Same as the other sort of third rate parties like UKIP. But even Reform before Nigel Farage is the only person that mattered in that clique. That's why they've brought him back. So I can't. Obviously, I've voted today. I voted for a local independent. It was the only person on the ballot who was anti-Zionist. So it was recommended by George Galloway. So that was an easy vote for me. Obviously, a lot of these parties now, there's not much to them. Reform, if these polls numbers are correct, that's quite surprising for me because I was predicting that Reform would take second place, that they'd be doing some serious damage to the Conservatives.
Yes. I'm also. I mean, I saw some projections that were much higher for this. Yeah, putting them at least third. I mean, I didn't see the Lib Dems doing this well in some people's projections. I wasn't too sure. I personally think that Farage entered the race a bit too late. I mean, I know this was a snap election, not a snap election, but not a the date wasn't picked out that far ahead, comparatively speaking. So yeah, I think his decision to enter, what was it, a month ago that he decided to actually run? That was probably one of the reasons why you haven't seen the sort of swell of support grow around him, because he does, if you're not aware, this is a man who some people say single-handedly did Brexit, even though he's never actually been an elected member of parliament. He's actually never actually sat in the UK government. He was elected to the European Parliament, ironically. But this is someone who does hold power in politics without actually having held office. He's the one with the buses and the campaigning for Brexit. And he had sort of resigned from politics to an extent after Brexit. He sort of thought his job was done. And yes, like 4 weeks ago, he came back. If he was serious about campaigning, he might have done better. But 13 seats is I mean, it's not exactly obviously it's not a huge amount. It's a very small amount of seats, but it is they are the fourth party effectively in here. Unless, I mean, they haven't got the Workers' Party up there. I'm curious to see how many candidates the Workers' Parties have got, because that should be, well, it's curious to see if it's going to be more than SNP. I'd be very surprised if it was more than SNP.
But they fielded a lot of candidates.
Yes.
It's obviously devastating time for George because he won a by-election in Rochdale less than 6 months ago, and obviously now he's contending that seat again, which is just absolutely terrible. Look, I'd love to see him retain it. I don't think the climate's changed enough for a shift one way or the other. Obviously, when Galloway won in his victory speech, he said, "This is for Gaza," and obviously is still a massive issue. The war is still ongoing, and I feel like Galloway he manages to speak well to a particularly Muslim audience and people who care about global issues relating to imperialism. I think he's better at doing that than addressing local issues. He did address local issues as well. He reopening the local hospital so people can be born in Rochdale again. I would have been born in Rochdale if it wasn't for the fact that the hospital was closed and I had to be born in Blackburn. So it's completely something that I can relate to. But that's not why people watch Galloway, is it? They watch him for international reasons rather than local town issues.
Right.
So just to jump back a minute, so we was talking about Labour concessions, and after obviously World War II, that's where we're given the NHS. I feel like Keir Starmer's already dropped his hint of what this concession is going to be, and it is small in the grand scheme of things. And it sounds like he is promising if he wins, he's going to recognise the state of Palestine, which to a lot of frontline Palestinian activists that sounds like great news, and it is good news. It is. There's no arguing about that. No one's going to say this is bad, but it's hollow in the sense that obviously this man is a Zionist. A Zionist married to an Israeli. His priorities and loyalties will always be to Israel rather than say to Palestine. This is something that he has been forced to do because of rebellions in his own party. If he could have done this without even acknowledging the Palestinian issue, he would do so. Also, he's again gives the empty, cold words of two-state solution. Even worse, he says that it has to be part of a peace negotiation. Nobody who knows these subjects believes in the two-state solution anymore. It is something that was dead. Yes, Arafat promoted it, and by all accounts, history shown that he was wrong to do so. As people have pointed out, Camp David was 20-something years ago. It was 1994. Not a single inch of Palestine is free since that point. It's just the occupations got harder and more brutal, and more people have suffered and died in the meantime. It's become a joke that everybody can stand behind and say, "Oh, we support the two-state solution," but it is de facto dead.
Yeah, it currently is. As it currently stands, the two-state solution is dead. It's true. There are still some voices, which even prominent voices. I think the Chinese position is still to have it depends on the phrasing here. I mean, two-state solution is one way of phrasing it. I mean, there are people that say that there has to be a Palestinian state, and de facto that means if there is an Israeli state, that's effectively a two-state solution. But there is still the view that the only way out of this, without mass slaughter and genocide and ethnic cleansing, is to have a Palestinian state, which is de facto, then two states. But yeah, as you say, that actual framework, the two-state, the Oslo, that thing that we had from the 90s is dead, and it has been dead for 25 years, effectively.
Yes.
And we've just sat in this undetermined space with what is it, 2.5 million people in Gaza, separated from the other people in the West Bank, living under an authority with their land being stolen every day, all backed and bankrolled by the West. Yeah, that's I guess that's his position on that. I mean, if he does recognize Palestine, yes, like you said, it's going to be some sort of that would be a big recognition from the West and the sort of core. You've seen Spain recognize, you've seen Slovakia recognize in the last few weeks. So that would be the first of the core Western sort of powers between France, Britain, and the US and Germany that would be the first of the big four, so to speak, making that recognition. I'm surprised. I'd be very surprised if he did that. He also, bear in mind, this is Keir Starmer. This is someone who famously now has been, people have identified that he has no values. He doesn't actually stand for anything. He'll just adjust his position. He'll change what he said. He said he was going to nationalize certain things. Then he said he wouldn't. He said he was going to get rid of the House of Lords. Then that sort of has been fallen. That's fallen by the wayside. So if he says, "Oh, I'll recognize a Palestinian state," I'll believe it when I see it.
Exactly. Well, these are some of the things that he's going to have to deal with in the next 4 years, which obviously it's becoming more and more clear that it will be him dealing with them. So it's going to be interesting to see how he sort of navigates them.
Yes.
Obviously, another thing that he's going to have to navigate, which is more sort of immediate to the conditions in the UK, is the situation in Ukraine. So I'm just going to play a clip from an interview on GB News, which I thought was very interesting.
I'll tell you who else has been speaking out today. There, George Galloway, of course, he unveiled the manifesto for the Workers' Party of Britain. One of the things that he had to say really caught my eye. Listen.
I'm going to make a prediction to you, Andrew. If Keir Starmer becomes the Prime Minister, within 6 months, Britain will be at war. I don't mean a proxy war. I don't mean special forces dressed up as Arabs or Russians, Ukrainians. I mean an actual war with British forces deployed within 6 months of Keir Starmer becoming Prime Minister. And then it's game on.
So obviously that's a massive claim. Not one I feel without merit. What do you reckon?
That's, I mean, it's, I obviously take a lot of time and respect to listen to George's opinion on various things, and think he gets most analysis, almost all analysis correct. That's a bold claim. I mean, you effectively, in effect, that would be World War III if Britain was at war with Russia, unless Britain provoked and Article 5 wasn't triggered, which I don't see the Americans allowing Britain to go to war with Russia by itself. I just don't see that happening. So that would be a big problem for everyone. So that's a huge claim to make. The only, if he's wrong, or in a sense, I think this might be maybe for election, headline grabbing, because that is a part of politics. That is a part of staying in the loop and staying relevant and staying, in people's ears and in front and on the camera, particularly on other people's channels. So politicians do have to make bold statements to grab the headlines, particularly in the sort of post-Trump or continuing Trump era. So that might be part of the explanation here. I mean, he's not insane. It's not an insane analysis, because if you know the atomic board of the world, the guys who have the doomsday clock, they've put it at 17 seconds to midnight, which is the closest it's been for probably since the 60s. So it's the framework that he's talking about, the potential for there to be war between Britain and Russia, or Britain to send troops or to go to war with Russia. Basically, it's not far. It's not a stretch. It's very, very close. So it's not a wild jump guess out of nowhere that he's making there. So the framework, the superstructure, we're already sending arms. We're already effectively with Storm Shadow missiles blowing up Russians and killing Russians, Russian troops and civilians. So in that sense, the proxy war is already on. So it's just a case of the direct war. But again, I would say that if that does happen, we are looking at World War III, which it still seems unlikely. But maybe I'm going to be wrong.
Yeah, because I feel like a lot of people have that image of and the memory of the beginning of World War II when Japan attacked America, and the president going on telly and I officially declare war on Japan. That doesn't really happen anymore. It happened. Bush did it. To be fair, he did go on telly and declare war on Iraq, but most wars aren't declared anymore. And so sometimes it's arguable when you can say when a war started or when you're already in one. I think it was last year where me and you went through some documents that have been leaked showing that the British and American government had personnel in Ukraine, and that was secret at the time. It wasn't a massive number, but how many men need to be there in order for you to be involved? They're already using NATO weapons that are now being able to fire inside Russia. So when Putin has said in the recent past that we are already at war with NATO, you can argue that from a certain point of view, he's definitely not wrong there, is he, to say that?
Yeah, no, absolutely. As we said, we are effectively already fighting and killing Russians. And as you say, yes, some boots on the ground, probably special forces and advisors and stuff, but those Storm Shadow missiles, I assume, probably still needed to link up to a British satellite in order to use guidance, or at least an American satellite for guidance. So yeah, we are involved already in the war with the Russians. Yeah.
Yeah. So obviously this is going to be something that's going to be very interesting for him to do. So he's got two very violent Starmer. He's got two very violent situations to address immediately. I find this just fascinating that this has fallen on the lap of a human rights lawyer who can't say whether it is illegal for Israel to block food and electricity from the Gaza Strip. It is completely illegal under international law, but he couldn't say that. And it's this sort of theme again with, I've always said that as soon as somebody especially if they're into politics, says that I'm a human rights lawyer, I've got a human rights background, that's immediate alarm bells for me. Because it's always an excuse by Western powers to bully smaller countries, brown faces, who usually stand up for their independence under, that country's abusing civil rights, or the greatest one, that country's got chemical weapons. Well, tell you what, give them nukes and they'll get rid of chemical weapons. The reason a country would have chemical weapons is because they're cheap and they can be used against powerful enemies.
Yeah, you're right. The whole human rights stuff is certainly a stick that has been used to beat opponents of the West, pesky countries that are in the way and are refusing to be a part of a bigger picture that they haven't been given the chance to, or the right to determine themselves. Yeah, I mean, particularly this thing about rights, human rights, and the sovereignty of nations, all of these things. We're seeing the utter sort of double-faced hypocrisy of this right now. I mean, the Gaza war has turned everything on its head. The usual Western narratives used to justify war or expansion or whatever is wrapped in that wrapping of human rights, international law, and so on and so on and so on. The ICC, the UK the US has put sanctions in place, ready in place for when arrest warrants are issued for their buddy, old Bibi Netanyahu. And the ICJ is actively has an active case against Israel, and Germany, France, Britain, the US have stood on the opposite side of that case, against effectively against international law. So it's an interesting time, as you said. Starmer, who will be the prime minister, I think we can pretty much say that with certainty now. He's going to receive a world where there are already two wars going on, one which Britain is very much involved, and one which we have tied ourselves to an ally who's effectively committing a genocide.
Yeah, and it's interesting that you said that rule of law. So obviously Britain's always posted itself as a government that champions the rule of law and international law. So this is an article from The Guardian this week. The ICC decision on Netanyahu arrest may be delayed by the UK. So we're doing everything that we can to sort of put the brakes on it. International law is great for when it's targeted at our enemies, when it's targeted at Hamas, when it's targeted at Putin, which the charges were dropped against Putin, apart from one minor one, but that didn't really get reported. But when it's our allies and it's inconvenient to our agenda, that's when international law has gone too far and it needs to be stopped. So obviously this is a decision being made by the current, for the next few hours, Tory government. I can't see this being reversed by Starmer.
Right. Right. No, I don't see him doing this, even though, as you said, he's an international lawyer. This is literally his colleagues. I mean, imagine you might even go to school with some of the people on the board or somewhere involved in the ICC. So
Yeah.
it's literally him continuing to make things difficult for his colleagues, his former colleagues, people that, you know, his work expertise. Yeah, I don't see him reversing this. I'm seeing them continue this case. Yeah.
Yeah, so it's going to be interesting. Obviously, the situation at home is already difficult. We've got massive backlogs in our own legal system. We've got rid of judges. There's been a sort of criminal vilification of judges in this country, and particularly lawyers. As we've always heard, every time a lawyer gets a win against the government, being accused of being lefty lawyers, ganging up on Britain's horrendous, morally bankrupt ideas to deal with immigration that were never going to work. We're only there to pander to the most nasty parts of the demographic who would vote for them. I don't think anybody in the right mind ever thought that the Uganda platform was going to work. But yeah, so in this, we've got these issues going on. Like I say, courts backed up, no lawyers. We've got huge issues with our prisons. We've got huge issues with our police. This government got rid of 21,000 police, then hired 20,000, and then acted like that was a plus. Like that's still 1,000 less than what we started with. That's not a win.
Yes.
It's not even a reverse.
Right. Yeah. I mean, it's actually an interesting point to make is what were the main elements of this election? What was actually, what were the issues people talking about? What were the key things that people were voting for? I think we've already touched on Gaza, and I think that certainly for a certain demographic and certain voter, that was an important issue. For others, it's not. For others, immigration, of course, is the one that's hanging over here. The boats you touched there with Rwanda. The Conservatives plan to send people who arrive by boat illegally to Rwanda, which has been tied up in the courts, as you said. Yeah, I mean, just for on the economic side, I mean, we can touch on immigration. I mean, hear what you have to say about that. But yes, I mean, what's it now? So the economic growth rate of the UK is 4.3%. But that's over the last 6 years. So I'll get the statistic out now for this year in a moment. But yeah, what do you think about the sort of main issues there were apart from Gaza that defined this election?
So one thing that I've sort of taken away from this campaign is that every idea that should have been an idea to run on from all sides has been incredibly half-baked and underperformed. So you can see that the Tories tried to run on an anti-immigration platform, but it didn't quite feel like an immigration election. They tried to do a bit of culture war stuff. Again, not everything's very ill-defined, and to the point where some parties, I haven't got a clue what their platforms are. It doesn't seem like a lot of them had one. Immigration obviously is a big issue because the TV tells us it's a big issue. But obviously, in this country, we've got mass poverty levels. We've got the highest level of taxes in 70 years. We've got the lowest level of corporate taxes in 50 years. It seems like when the Tories realised they were losing, they just gave up and gave the mates everything, knowing that's going to get a lot of it's going to get reversed.
Right. Exactly. Yes. I just want to touch on something there. You mentioned some of the policies that some people are running on. The Conservatives, in particular, after I think they knew that they were going to be going down, Rishi Sunak announcing that he wanted to bring back national service, which, I mean, I think some people made some great comments about this, sort of saying this is like a manifesto from a child, sort of, if a child would just sort of pick together a bunch of things and go, this is my manifesto now. I mean, running on national service in 2024, it just seems like really desperate, clutching at straws, just trying to drag and get sort of your most, your oldest and most sort of conservative voters to try and say, oh, that's a good one. It's a very it is a generally speaking right-wing sort of talking point, like national service and whatever. I mean, no, I mean, there's a lot to discuss. There's a lot to unpack there. I think there's certainly an interesting element to talk
it appeals to a certain generation, the older generation who statistically vote for Tory. When you speak to these older Tories, the two things that they always we should bring back national service to sort the young out, and we should bring back the death penalty. Nobody was talking about the death penalty in this election, but national service is one of those. And like I say, they knew they weren't going to win, so they could say whatever they want. After they announced that idea, one of the UK generals piped up and said, well, this is a terrible idea. We haven't got enough men to fight a war, so you want me to then keep 10% of my army back to train a bunch of youths? And it's just infeasible. It's going to cost more than what it's worth. And obviously we've seen in Ukraine, because they've got widespread conscription going on now. And to the point where we've not seen this level of conscription in the West since World War II. The difference is in World War II, you were using handheld one-pot bazookas, rifles that basically anyone can fire. And it was a simpler time with simpler equipment. Trying to teach a lot of the time, lumpen proletariat to use javelin missiles and high-tech equipment, that you need an education to use this stuff in the first place. It's not as simple as just point and fire as it used to be. This is special. That's why we have reliant professional armies now. So it was a childish idea that was never going to work. It was a last-ditch attempt to get these elderly Tories to vote for him.
Yeah, no, I think
by the looks of it, it's failed quite splendidly.
Yeah, no, I think that what the general said originally was the best point on that was, this is a professional army. You now want to turn it into a half professional, half conscript army. And yes, the numbers, the whole design of the entire, it would be an entire restructuring of the military. I mean, as you said, it would have to be the professional staff would mostly be dedicated to training the conscripts. And then, I mean, at best, you get a 2-year rotation. And as we've seen in Israel with Gaza, conscripts make terrible soldiers. I mean, as you already explained, why. They don't have the experience. They don't have the training. They're not going to be there for more than 2 years usually. So that whole element. I mean, yes, you need the numbers. It's a war. It's a wartime strategy. I don't know why on earth you would even bring this up. But I think, it was a whole thing about building up the country, and they wouldn't just be military. It would be cleaning the rubbish and doing delivering medicine to the elderly and whatever. So anyway, it seemed like a desperate last ditch.
You mentioned Israel, and when he posed this idea, they mentioned Israel as well. They used Israel as an example. The difference is, like, when you look at the actual numbers involved, the Israel army, it's not particularly effective. They have numbers and they've got Western equipment. That's why they win battles, not because they've got well-trained troops. And that's not the reason why they have conscription in Israel. The reason they have conscription in Israel is because their country is based on blood and violence. And this is an effective method to get the blood on everybody's hands.
Yeah. I mean, they also occupy, a huge territory and do need the numbers, whereas Britain has a sea around it. So we don't need to protect our borders and subjugate thousands or millions of people who want to have their own country inside our country. If you're Israel, that is. Yeah. Nonetheless, talking about the numbers. So actually, the growth rate, if you take from 2007 to 2023, is the average is 4.3%. So bear in mind that includes part of the recession and the recovery. That includes COVID. So there's a lot of different factors there. But it's the lowest growth rate for Britain since 1826. So it's a very, very low growth rate on average if you take from 2007. And then on inflation, I don't know what the inflation rate is, but we all know the stories of the last few years of inflation, the prices of things going up. And I haven't lived in the UK for a while, so I can't remember what the prices of things were, but I'm pretty sure that the inflation rate is 31% surge in food prices, cost of living. So that's huge. I mean, that's literally a third. 31% is a huge growth of inflation.
Yeah, it's been absolutely devastating. I mean, like, in this country, we've had record numbers of people using food banks, and when you go to these places, luckily, I'm very fortunate that I've not been in this situation this time round. I have used food banks in the past many years ago, but I've managed to keep my head above water, luckily this time, touch wood. But when you see these places and the people that are going in them, they're not the people that you expect. They're not people on benefits, and the unemployed. These people go as well, but these people who are working full time, who you think shouldn't be in that situation. So we're in a country where people who, by any metric in a developed part of the world, where you have a good job, doctors, lawyers, these people shouldn't be struggling in a developed country. But the system has completely collapsed around them. And I think this is, again, reflective completely of the Tory government, and I don't see it changing. It didn't change last time under Blair from Thatcher. He carried on Thatcher's war on the unions and privatisation of the NHS with PFIs. And so this war against NHS staff, war against union workers, war against our legal system. Last year we had lawyers on strike protesting. That's incredible to see. You'd never see it, and obviously a big part of it was their own conversation, but a large section of that was the fact that the collapse of the legal aid system. And again, this is something that I can relate to. I've been unfortunate where I've had to rely on legal aid to get myself through court appearances, family court, criminal court, and without that cushion, you're representing yourself against trained lawyers.
Right.
And it's incredible to think that these are such vital things that people rely on. If you're going to have a legal system of jury trials and say that everyone has the right to be represented, why isn't that a right? You'd think it should be a right.
It should be. I believe it is. It should be a well-funded thing if you want to have a decent society, at least on a liberal framework of a society, how society works. That's supposed to be one of the pillars is equal representation before the law and whatnot. I must say, on an anecdotal level, I mean, I when I lived in the UK, like 2016 or before, I don't remember there being people donating food just at the supermarket. You'd have a little section of the supermarket where people donate food now. This is something I noticed when I went recently to visit it. I was in a supermarket and I noticed some food at the end of the checkout, sort of on a shelf with a particular packaging and dates and a sort of branding. And it was food that had been donated by other people, whether that's from home or from they bought it off the shelf, or it was food that was expiring. It was all going to people that needed it in the supermarket. So we're not talking about taking it to homeless people out in the street and a donation system like this. This is from other shoppers giving to shoppers and people in the supermarket with you who are ordinary people needing this. And this was, a very big supermarket in London. This wasn't a sort of broken Britain northern town where, the mining community is gone and all this kind of stereotype that we think of where poverty exists in Britain. It was in London.
I think this sort of says a lot that there's an ideology that's pushed incredibly so since the fall of the Soviet Union and the retreat of socialism in the sort of Western world or Eastern Europe. But this ideology of individualism has been pushed to no end in Western academia. And along with that ideology comes this promotion of selfishness. And it always amazed me that every time push comes to shove or where people are in need, that ideology breaks and you see people help. Because that is the default nature. When you hear idiots try and criticize Marxism and stuff, and one of the big lines there was, "Oh, but you forgot about human nature." So, well, when you do witness human nature in these acts, you see that it is the default position of people to look after each other. I always think that one of the biggest lies we're ever taught growing up is that it's a dog-eat-dog world, and we're told that lie by people that want us to eat each other because we don't. And we whenever there's a crisis, we do come together. Yes, and it does inspire me to see, even when it's in the worst circumstances, like food poverty.
Yes. Right. I mean, I always wonder when people say dog eat dog world and selfishness or whatever. I mean, what's your relationship with your family like? Is that how you treat your family? Is that how you behave when you're family and you have a dog eat dog world? You steal from your brother, or you you take from your parents and abuse them and sacrifice them when they're old? Is that what you mean? Is that how you behave? I mean, it's just stuff that when they talk about, I don't know, someone else as some sort of distant person that they don't want to think about. I mean, in some sense, though, it's true that the conditions of when you don't have safety nets and whatnot, and you are driven to desperation, that some people are driven to that sort of extreme of committing crimes, of stealing, of murder and whatnot. But that's because of the conditions, because of the dog eat dog world mentality that creates the effect. So it's sort of creating the environment for your argument, and you say, oh, it's because of people committing crimes. That's why the world is dog eat world, dog eat world. But no, it's because we start with the premise that you're out for yourself. You can only look after yourself, and there's going to be no support for you. So because it's a dog eat, it's a ridiculous situation.
Exactly. It's a self-fulfilling prophecy. And like you said about how it's easier for them to then demonize people who are far away, or they don't feel like real people, which is what the media relies on with these immigration arguments. These are people, but when you're just seeing a black and white cold argument presented through the BBC of boats coming, and if you ever want to lose faith in humanity, just read the comment section on one of these posts, and people saying, "Oh, they just need shooting at the border, or just let them sink." And stuff. These are real people, and I think a lot of people forget that.
Yeah,
and it wasn't in our lifetime, but it was definitely in our grandparents' time, where they were fleeing bombs in the UK out of the cities to other people's homes, sometimes to other countries for refuge. And we're just lucky that we've had such a relative stability in this country where we've not been running from bombs, that we've forgotten about that.
Yeah.
You can almost argue that it would humble us to go through that again in a very real sense.
Right.
And if George Galloway's prediction are any right, then that may be happening sooner than later. Hopefully, we all manage to get immigrant status in Canada to flee Russian bombs if Starmer drags us into a war with NATO.
Right. I mean, on the immigration question, it's the only issue that I think you can say is totally global, even though it seems like a personal issue, national issue. But it's an issue in the UK, it's an issue in France, it's an issue in Germany, it's an issue in the US, as we know, with the border and Trump and all that kind of stuff. But it's also an issue within even Africa. I mean, South Africa, we've also had just an election, a month ago, 29th of May. So that came up too. So it's not just a European or Western issue of the poor people coming, brown people coming to our country and taking our jobs and all that kind of stuff. It's also an issue in South Africa. And there are people from Zimbabwe, people from Malawi, people from various African countries that to the north that come into South Africa, and the same dialogue, the same discussion, the same talking points come up. We can't have these people. There's too many of them. There's not enough jobs. The healthcare system can't take this. The education system can't take this. It's leading to crime. It's all the same talking points, exactly the same talking points. But it's a global issue. Immigration is a global issue. Human migration, as some people might call it. Some of it born from war, a lot of it born from war. Some of it from climate change. Some of it from bad governance within a particular country. It's
economic sabotage is the case of Eastern Europe.
Yes,
like a lot of these people. Economic sabotage is the case of Eastern Europe. I remember a lot of, in the UK specifically, some of the largest groups of immigrants we get are Albanians, Poles, and Romanians. And it's no coincidence that these are all former socialist countries. This is what happens when you desecrate a country's economy and leave them with nothing. So, of course, they're going to look for greener pastures.
Right. And also, yes, as you say, like Estonia, Latvian, and Lithuanians were the first people to break away from the Soviet Union and are now touted as having some, tech-based advanced economies. But if you look at the population statistics, the population is in a dive. People leaving the country. Where do they go? They go to Britain. So it's a strange thing that Britain and other Western countries pushed for these nations to be independent from the Soviet Union and then to become breakaway republics, to become members of the EU and NATO, and then all of their people who want jobs I don't look down on someone who wants to have a better life. So they go to Britain and then take British jobs, so to speak. It's the geopolitics seems to always trump the actual national interests for many countries. Particularly
and it's a shame
for
that
European countries.
particularly immigration in the West is completely hijacked by the right wing, and it's forced this ridiculous situation where, in terms of just being contrarians, the left then feel that they have to oppose it completely in order to be as left as they possibly can, which is childish. Like, any country needs a sensible, realistic immigration policy that's not based on racism, but that is based on the needs of the people coming in versus your ability to house them. Don't take more than you can deal with, but don't let people fan the flames. Like, I think you pointed out to me a while ago, like, some of the policies that Nigel Farage is touting are very similar to what China have. But nobody would argue the point that China's right wing because it's got an immigration policy.
Yeah, no, totally. I mean, if you look at the immigration policy of the Soviet Union, of Cuba, of China, of North Korea, of Vietnam, yes, these countries don't allow and wouldn't allow tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands of people to flood in because they have a generally planned economy. So you can't say, okay, we're going to have X amount of hospitals based on X amount of people, and then all of a sudden 100,000 people turn up over the course of 2 years. That plan will not work. So you will not have the needs provided by the people. So it's a yes, like you said, it's a difficult topic to actually discuss for people on the left because they don't want to be put in boxed with the Nigel Farage and the right wing and this kind of stuff. But it's a real problem for the left because they can't talk to their, at the end of the day, they're talking to working class people. That's usually the objective of left wing politics. And for these people, jobs and a good sort of sustainable basic life with a well-paying job and local services are the key issues. If you do have a large amounts of people coming in to an underfunded system, then yes, ordinary working class people do see that more than anyone else, and are drawn to the idea like, well, okay, well, if there's going to be limited money, whoever I vote for, whether it's Conservative or Tory, then I'm going to vote for someone who's going to reduce the strain on that. In the most basic of sort of analysis, if we put that down, that's what goes through a lot of people's minds. And I mean, if you are a working class person, it is what is presented to you. There is no large mass scale real working class party. So you go, well, okay, it's either Labour, Tory, that's it, and I can only vote for someone that's going to reduce the strain, the quote unquote. That's the logic, I think, for a lot of working class people.
Yeah. And obviously, one thing that causes a wave of immigration every time it does happen is a war. We saw this in Syria, where mass immigration, millions of people left Syria during the beginning of their civil war. And this is something that should be touted more regarding Ukraine. Now, if we do escalate it there, which, let's be honest, the situation in Ukraine will escalate if we decide to allow it to escalate. That is when we'll see millions more Ukrainians, a lot of time fleeing the Dodge, as they are doing, to come to settle here. And at the moment, they've got all the goodwill because they're white, because they're anti-Russian, so our media supports them. And that is going to dry up very quickly when they start to be mixed in with the rest of the immigrants coming in, which they will do.
Yes.
So
yeah.
I've just got.
You're right. Actually, that's a good point to make. Is that a large part of the big current immigration again is because of war. Yes, Ukrainians, right? And if you look at the camp, the jungle, the Calais camp, that I don't know if it's there anymore, where they've removed it or whatever, but the camps, the people that gather on the Calais Peninsula, the Calais area to cross on their boats. There are countries that don't necessarily fit this description, but it is usually countries that have had wars, NATO or Western-backed wars, Afghanistan, Syria, sometimes Libyans, sometimes, and then countries under sanctions like Eritrea, and I mean, in the American cases, Venezuela is a large part of them, which again is a country under sanctions with economic pressures against the government. So there's actually a German politician who's running at the moment, a new party. It's a breakaway from Die Linke. I've forgotten the name of her, but she's running. She talks about this immigration issue with a degree of I think a line that would be acceptable to a lot of working class people. In that, yes, we need to have an immigration policy. However, we must also stop doing these wars that lead to the immigration. So that's the first thing she opens with: is let's stop doing these wars which lead to all these people coming. And then, yes, we have to have a limit. We can't just have 500,000 people turning up every 6 months.
Yeah, I think this is sort of one of the sort of the blessings of the tools of sort of left-wing populism, that a lot of these points that the right wing fall back on so many times can be answered with a left-wing platform, which, such as immigration, like you just said, will stop bombing their countries and they'll stop coming. And the second one, obviously, a big one that you always hear, looking after veterans. Well, one of the best ways to look after veterans is to not make them. When wounded soldiers who need medical care, will stop putting them in harm's way.
Mm-hmm.
We've got I'm not anti-army. I'm anti-war. I believe that you should have an army. You should have a good army, a well-trained army that should protect your shores and your land.
Yeah.
As soon as you're in someone else's land, you can't argue it's for defence anymore.
Mm-hmm.
So George Galloway actually had a suggestion the other day, quite outlandish as a lot of his suggestions are, of his answer to immigration, of using the Royal Navy to protect our shores.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Yeah, sure.
Yeah, so
I
suppose if you drilled into that, you could come out to a good idea of basically using it as a blockade, in a sense, to block lanes. It doesn't mean shooting them. It doesn't mean damaging the boats and pushing them out, but literally being a wall in the sea.
Yes,
it gives the Navy something to do that's not causing a war and stops immigration. Everybody's kind of happy and kind of safe.
And you can catch smugglers potentially, if you have the Navy there. Yeah, I mean, to be honest, I think there's a better argument for using the Royal Navy and military assets to do that than there is in shipping arms off to Israel. I don't really see how that benefits veterans or the nation. I actually struggle to understand why Britain supports Israel. But let's we've already gone to Israel. You had something up in a moment ago. It's some polls. Let's take a look.
Yeah, so let's have a look where we are.
Okay, so
at the moment it doesn't look particularly exciting, to be honest. So nothing has come in. What we've been seeing on the telly, that these are exit polls, so these are predictions, guesses, good guesses. I don't know how these guesses are made, but I assume that they're good.
Yeah. So yes,
but nobody's actually.
They showed some historic exit polls on Sky yesterday, and sometimes they get them exactly right. I think whichever year it was, 3 or 4 elections ago, the exit poll was 100% right on the Conservatives, and maybe 5 seats out or 15 seats out on the Labour and the rest. So let's say within 10%, maybe even within 5% of the actual result. So it's close enough to be what the result is going to be. I don't think unless it's a very tight election, which this year it isn't. As we knew, everyone knew. This is not, just to clarify, there's no surprise that Labour has won this. There's no surprise at all. This is why a lot of your also people that would tend to tell you to vote Labour because they're not the Conservatives have said, oh, vote for independence this year because we know that Labour's going to win, so you can actually vote freely. People like Owen Jones, who would usually say, with a sort of, well, actually, this year is the first year he said, don't vote Labour, but he would usually say, oh, I know that Labour's this, but it's still not the Tories, so please just vote for Labour. This is usually what we're told to do and forced to do. Same way that the Americans are always forced to say, oh, well, I know the Democrats are terrible, but please vote for the Democrats, sort of, or vice versa. So this is the first year that people have actually chosen to vote, what the left sort of leaning people have chosen to vote, what they would actually like to vote for, more than ever. So on that there, I just want to check. So do you think, does that mean Nigel Farage might actually become a member of British Parliament?
If there's anyone who's going to win out of reform, it is going to be him. He's picked where his seat to run in because UKIP won there in the past. Sorry?
Which seat is he running?
Clacton something.
Let me check here.
Yeah. But see that UKIP won in the past, so he thinks that it's got a good chance. He's obviously going to throw all of his resources in. I think it was quite interesting that when you look at some of the bookie sites for the next Conservative leader, Nigel Farage is actually Bookie's favourite to be next Tory leader, which sounds mad until you realise his entire plan for this. Like, he's named his party the Reform Party after the Canadian Reform Party, which tackled the old Conservative Party in Canada, knocking them to third place and forced them to merge. And that's why you've got the Reform Conservative Party. He's running on a platform of we're the true Thatcherites.
Mm-hmm.
So I can completely see this happening. If the Tories lose to third place, that's their sort of motivation to hold together gone.
Got you. Yeah. No, well, actually, this is a point that we haven't actually discussed yet, is that some people were saying this election would be the end of the Conservative Party, the death of the Conservative Party, with them getting something like 20 seats and whatnot. So this line by Farage then would be very likely if they had dropped that much. But I think it's a little bit. I think maybe Farage is not going to be the leader of the Conservative Party because the Conservatives have still got they're still second. If they'd been beaten by the Lib Dems or someone else, then I would say that collapse was happening and Farage could step into a sort of corpse of a Conservative Party. But 120 actually isn't that bad. The Conservative Party was beaten.
Like I say, these are estimates. We've not got any polls in yet.
Yeah. So yeah, it's not the result is exactly sure. This could be slightly different. However, if it does come somewhere within this range, the Labour Party had a better majority in 1997, so they would still not have beaten Blair's famous landslide victory in 97. So the Conservative could still come back from this, although it would take 10 years if we use the Labour Party of Blair as a model. Although I must say, Blair, with all of his faults and flaws, was a politician that was popular. Starmer is not. Starmer is no Blair. Never will be. At least on
no, and obviously,
But on
Blair
policy,
wasn't just popular in his own party; he was popular in the Conservative Party. I always remember Thatcher's famous words when she was asked what is her greatest achievement, and she said Tony Blair and the Labour Party. Blair was the one who brought what should have been a left-wing socialist party to the centre, famously getting rid of Clause 4 out of the party's manifesto, which a lot of socialists in the party believed that was the Labour Party's commitment to socialism. And he sort of watered it down to the Labour Party as a social democratic party that believes in being sort of communal without actually saying common ownership. I think that was the line that they'd moved. So yeah, everything was very intentional. It was so subtle that if you blinked, you'd miss it.
Yes, no, you're right. Yeah, just for anyone who doesn't know, Clause 4 is the basically nationalization clause that the state would own some elements of the economy and run some elements of the economy. The other thing I want to mention about this whole election, and particularly because this year is the year of the elections. Like I said, the US, the UK, Russia, India, South Africa, we've already seen some of those elections. The US one, of course, is the big one that everyone will talk about and know about. However, in Europe, of course, we've also got France and Germany. They, of course, had the European elections, the European EU elections, the EU parliamentary elections. And there's this phrase going around that the far right has taken over. So things like the parties like the AfD, Alternative for Deutschland, and then, of course, Marine Le Pen, her party, is in a runoff, I think, next week for France. And the language of the BBC World Service is something you should really look at for this. And you'll see it across many other news channels, is this thing of the far right and the hard left and the radical left, and this language of extremism, that these are always extremes. And it's implied, it's implicit that the center is stable, the center is reasonable, the center is calm, the center is safe. Was that intentional? Sorry, Chris, I don't know if you're just having some fun with the camera there.
I was just playing about.
Okay, that's fine. It
is carefully choreographed, isn't it? Because it's the point of when the West talk about left and right. It's never something that me or you or any of our comrades would recognise as left or right. I always remember. Do you remember who was that guy from Venezuela who pretended to be the president for a little bit?
Juan Guaido.
Yeah. So when he went to America for an interview, he was interviewed at the time about Venezuela, about all the power that you pretend to have, because obviously nobody in Venezuela had a clue who he was. But he was asked about Bernie Sanders, and was trying to compare. The interview was obviously trying to compare Bernie Sanders to Maduro, and Guaido said, "Well, to be honest, you call him a socialist. In our countries, he's like a centre left social democrat. Like we wouldn't consider that socialist at all." And the interviewer was absolutely shocked by the sort of rebuttal of the American poles of politics, and it is that so much. Like in this, even in this country, not as much as in America, because America's a cartoon in terms of the way it behaves in politics. Everything's so over the top. But even in this country, the far left doing this, the far left. Does that mean you've never even met someone on the far left? Like you wouldn't know the far left if you tripped over it. The amount of times I've spoken to somebody and they've identified me as far left, and they say, "Oh, I suppose that you're pro EU then." No. Why would you think that? Because you've seen these liberals on telly that the media tell you these are far left, these are far left positions, and it is a caricature to make it all look so ridiculous. And it's more so on the right. Everyone who's right of Farage is a fascist. Everyone who's left of Corbyn is a communist, and it's childish.
Yeah, 100%. And it is cleverly choreographed. I mean, I think the BBC World Service in particular is effectively just MI6's psychological operations department. But
yes,
that whole framing is very intentional to sort of make establishment parties center seem safe and reliable, and everyone else is extremists. And as you said, even the extremists that they're talking about, I mean, when you then talk to other people, yeah, I mean, far left is Corbyn, far left is Sanders. This is ridiculous. I mean, these people. I mean, Sanders not so long ago would still say that Israel needed some support in arms. Not that I want to keep talking about Israel, but yeah, these positions. I mean, he voted for various wars, Iraq War, and also famously gave up when when the Democratic Party basically hacked him and cut him off, even though he was the favorite candidate. Still just chose to endorse whichever candidate they put in the party. Yeah. You mentioned
so where we are now, obviously,
yeah,
this is, as you said, this has been the year of elections. Everybody and the mum has been having an election. So, like I said, we had South Africa, we had Russia, which was a close call, but luckily out of nowhere, Putin won after his opponent fell out of a window. But yeah, nobody was surprised by that. But that's none of our concern. The big one, obviously, is America. That's the one that everyone is going to be watching very closely. Did you watch the debate?
I did. I watched the debate. The way to begin with that one. Obviously, everyone's seen the gaffe, the moment where Biden loses his train of thought and starts mumbling, and then says, "We've been fighting Medicaid," and then, of course, because of the rules, they're being cut off. And that was the last thing he said. And then Trump said, "Yeah, he has been beating the crap out of Medicaid." Blah 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 blah. So,
if you didn't think it, if you knew it wasn't scripted, you wouldn't believe it, would you? It was so perfect for it to land like that, and for Trump to just pick it up. Yeah, you beat it to death.
Yes.
It was painful to watch. Like,
I assume you've seen it now. It was a very difficult debate. The first 10 minutes, of course, were the worst for Biden. He did hit the ball, so to speak, a bit later when it came to abortion, and he had some good one-liners against Trump. But overall, that moment of that lapse where he dropped and he didn't know what he was saying, and those things continue. There were other moments like that where he wasn't clear. That was the whole point. He was not supposed to do that. He was supposed to show that he is. Yes, he's 81, but he can carry on until he's 86, no problem. If you saw that performance, this is not someone who you would think, okay, 4 years from now, he'll be okay. No, like this is only going to
4 years from now, he'll be dead.
Potentially. I mean, that's likely. Any man over 80 is a risk.
Yeah.
But yeah, but just to
go into people's heads even more, because obviously if he dies, constitutionally that goes to Kamala Harris, who arguably is the most unpopular vice president.
So the Republicans have already picked up that ball and are using it in their campaigning. They've already said, what happens if Biden dies? Kamala Harris is now going to be the president. So you're actually voting for Kamala Harris, not Biden.
Yeah.
And they just play a bunch of videos of her being, as she is, very unlikable, just an unlikable character.
So it's interesting. Immediately after that debate, there was murmurs. Some of Biden's friends came out and said, he didn't do great, but we're going to recover. And there was a lot of murmurs and whispers in the Democratic camp. This week, a senator, a congressman, actually came out publicly and said, "Yep, I think that Biden should step down." I don't know how they think that removing a candidate months before an election is a good idea. Right. One of the big differences between the American electoral system and our electoral system, I feel like our electoral system, we vote more for the party than, like, people will vote Labour regardless of Starmer or regardless of Corbyn because it's Labour. Where in America, it's much more personality driven.
I mean, I'd say to an extent. I do think that they have the two parties stuck.
They have the camps, yeah.
And
they register as well, don't they? I've never quite understood that. I've heard people say I'm a registered Democrat. So, does that mean you're a member of the party, or just?
I think for the member, yeah.
Have you heard that? Yeah.
But just to pick up what you sorry, go ahead. Finish your point.
Yeah. So I feel like after that debate, Biden's had repeated blows and not had a win, where Trump, on the other hand, has just been told by the Supreme Court that he does have some immunity from prosecution for things that he did in court, which now means that these charges that he's just been convicted for might now need to be looked at again, because, okay, well, some of the evidence that we looked at related to when you were president, so should we have convicted you? Even if it doesn't go anywhere, in terms of the media, their wins, Biden's had blows. So it's completely feasible that Trump's going to win. I can completely see that happening.
Certainly. So, yeah, I just want to make some points there. So you mentioned the performance at the debate was one thing. What's worse? So the performance was a thing in and of itself, which was bad. However, the next day he had a rally and he was very fired up and he spoke quite well and it was quite reassuring. And you kind of got this feeling of like, you know what? Yeah, rage against the dying of the light. Yeah, he can do it. Let's go. He's got a bit of fire in him, and it's kind of an underdog, a bit of like a boxer that's been punched, and he gets up, and you start supporting them again. Like, okay, actually, maybe this genocidal man is okay. But when you, as you just mentioned, when you have people of your party sitting congressmen, people elected the House of Representatives, saying he should really step down. It wasn't just one. I think I've been counting them actually. Elected representatives of the party. I'm up to 5 now. I think just on Sky News's record showing different people speaking. So it must be at least 5 now who have said publicly, to the media with a microphone, we think he should step down. They obviously phrase it in a nice way. Joe's done a good job, but we need to have a new candidate.
Yeah.
The Economist yesterday, actually, their title page was a Zimmer frame with the US emblem on the front, and their catchline on Twitter, at least, was Biden should be remembered for the things that he achieved and the breakthroughs that he made, not his decline. He should step down. That's the Economist. So it's a pretty big publication to say that. Other ones have been saying he should continue. But my point is, 6 months or 5 months before an election, you can't be having a conversation and people saying, he should step down. That's not. We're in campaign season already. You can't be. You're not going to win if that's the kind of talk that's happening.
Yeah. And obviously, one of the big differences as well between how both sides of the pond have dealt with issues of rebellion within their own parties. Because obviously, the Democrats, you've got all the little factions, the socialist bloc in there, and all sorts of pressure groups but they're all part of the Democrats, as you did historically have in the Labour Party as well. Red Labour, the little Marxist study group cliques and that pretended to they were allowed to operate. But in America, you saw this huge boycott movement of democratic Muslims refusing, threatening to withhold their vote for Biden, thus losing in the election because of his support of Israel. It felt like Starmer saw that coming and got rid of that potential rebellion block in his party to the point where it's scarily loyal to him. Like there are no dissenting voices in the UK Labour Party left because everybody's been kicked out, and as soon as you get kicked out, the BBC don't want to know, especially for that reason, because the BBC obviously have such tentacles inside their operations from the Israeli embassy that they're not allowed to go seek out these independent voices who have been kicked out of the Labour Party for criticising Israel. Why were you kicked out? What did you say that got you kicked out? They've been silenced. Complete radio silence. So Starmer's sort of done what Biden didn't manage. In crushing a potential rebellion.
Important point there. In terms of the internal dynamics of the Labour Party, you have the parliamentary Labour Party and then the Labour Party. And you have then the permanent staff. Some people might use the deep state of the party, the permanent people that are never elected but are always in positions of power within the apparatus, like sort of office jobs or secretaries or whatever within the party. So that's another dynamic, and that was obviously how they kicked out Corbyn. Was the parliamentary Labour Party didn't like him, the permanent staff, the civil servants, the deep state of the party didn't want him. And there's a deep link there with Israeli intelligence. And this is not just speculation. There's a Boris Johnson had to kick out a person who was caught on film, member of the Israeli embassy, who was caught on film saying, "I've got money for anyone who's got dirt on Diane Abbott or whoever's got some connections, and we can help you with content." It was a straight up intelligence operation to try and have Israeli control and influence within the Labour Party and effectively within the British government.
Yeah. So,
is that the first seat that's come out? They've declared the first seat, I think. Exit poll there, a small red dot.
Second so far. Labour have hold. Let's refresh where we are.
Yeah, I think that's the first declared seat now.
Yeah, one of six, first one of Labour.
Yeah. And not really surprising. Red Wall up north. Where's that, near Newcastle, I think, or where is that? I'm not sure.
Houghton and Sunderland South.
Sunderland South. There we go. Yeah, Sunderland. Okay.
So we're on 2
seats. Okay, 2 seats declared. Okay.
648 to go.
Okay. Oh, what's interesting to see there is the second place in that seat is Reform. So look at third place is the Conservatives, less than half of what Reform got, and then surprisingly Lib Dems for some reason got votes. But the point there is that's a result that looks like what people were predicting: Reform becoming second.
So obviously this is going to go on all night, and neither of us are going to manage to carry on for indefinitely. Just so everyone knows, Rich, you're actually in. Where are you now?
I'm in
currently?
Japan. Actually, I'm in Japan.
Yeah, so we've actually dragged Rich up in the middle of the morning to join us today to have a look at this. The last time I actually did one of these was Corbyn, round 1, and before that it was Trump versus Hillary. Both times I started the stream at the same time and left not long after where we are now, and it looked like one side was winning. And I woke up in the morning and Theresa May had won and Trump had won, and that wasn't what it looked like when I went to sleep. So it's important to remember that things can change throughout the night. What I'd suggest is that either one or both of us do have another short catch up tomorrow afternoon, just to quickly go over the results and just see if our predictions were right. My predictions aren't tremendously different than what the polls are, other than I suspected Reform to do a lot better than they're saying. I think the Reform are going to do damage to the Conservatives. I hope and do pray that George Galloway retains his seat. I'd like to see a few more Workers' Party candidates also win. I would like to see some good anti-Zionist independents take some seats. So we've got some good votes in the House of Commons. So I've today, as I said, I voted for an independent, Naveed Karim, who is our local independent. One of the only person that I could see who was standing up for Israel, for Palestine. In these bourgeois elections, you do have to pick your battles. Like a quote that I've used many times from Harpel Bra, who would always would say this, that if Karl Marx himself came back from the grave and took over the Labour Party, he couldn't turn it into anything more than a social democratic bourgeois party. And we have to remember that and be realistic with our expectations, which I think everybody really is. Nothing's going to change. So what you can achieve is a platform. And that's why we should be hoping for these good voices to be put into good seats that can highlight issues that do matter. Nobody's going to be able to advocate and achieve socialism through these methods, but they can put pressure on the forces of imperialism in this world.
Yeah, I think my predictions are not much different to yours. Obviously, Labour is going to win this with a huge majority. It's not as much as 97. I think the Conservative number is going to go down. I don't think it's going to be as high as 131. I think it's going to go down. I suspect the Reform number will be higher. I think we're potentially closer to 20, maybe 30 seats, even though I thought that would be higher, and many people did. I think that's going to go up. The independent number is pretty good at 35. Obviously, that includes Workers' Party, most likely Workers' Party candidates, or at least ones endorsed by the Workers' Party. So yes, I also want to hopefully see George Galloway re-elected. I have a suspicion he should be re-elected since he won his mandate so recently. I think people, will only do that vote again. Not much has changed for them in their processing of that vote. I'm hoping, yes, more Workers' Party candidates come in. Maybe the deputy, Chris Williamson. I think he probably has a potential. What I'm curious to see is how Andrew Feinstein does against Starmer in his own seat, if I'm not mistaken. I'd be very surprised if he won that. That would be the biggest news of the day if Starmer didn't win his own seat. But yeah, those are my things I'm looking for. I'm not particularly interested or excited about SNP or the Lib Dems. I think there's not much really discussed there apart from them just being the legacy vote potentially. But yeah, those are my predictions.
Yeah,
Conservatives
it's a shame. I've seen some comrades that I've known for a good few years that I know I've got in the past had good politics and have some good platforms. Who some I've been in parties with before, who then got heavily involved in the trade union movement, and then this election that I've seen, unfortunately, I'm running for the Communist Party of Britain. I thought, bless.
I know you're talking about. Yes, I know exactly what you're talking about.
Yeah.
But yeah.
I'm not going to name him. I don't want to.
I don't know. To be honest, I don't know why they wasted their money.
No.
Yeah.
At least this time, the Communist Party of Britain actually fielding candidates and not telling people to vote for Labour like they do every other election.
Right,
suppose.
Yeah, well, at least they're fielding candidates. Exactly. It would be nice to have at least having an actual CPB MP would be better than just a Labour endorsed one. Just one quick one then. There is the RCP, which have had this sort of new, young, exciting person, who's been speaking on sort of news platforms or whatever. She was on GB News as well. That's where she got catapulted.
I saw her.
She was being interviewed by Philip Braverman. I've forgotten her name.
Girl who was speaking to Roger Pink Floyd.
Yes, Roger Waters. Yeah. Yes, she spoke to him.
She's from the RCG.
Yes, so well, they call themselves the RCP now. So for people who gladly, I'm sorry that you have to now know this, the inner workings of the obscure items of forgotten and unknown political parties, but the Revolutionary Communist Group is this? I assume it is their break now. They're no longer a group. They're now a party. RCP. Is that right, Chris? Is that who these people are?
I assume so. If this is the rump of it, because there was loads of sexual assault allegations that came out from the communist group, which is why they sort of disappeared into the ether. So I'm guessing this is them reforming, if that's the case.
Okay. Yes. So yeah. So anyway, RCP is running this candidate. They've chosen to put her in the same seat. She's running in the same seat as the whistleblower, one of the whistleblowers who helped with the Labour Files documentary that Al Jazeera had, which I mentioned earlier. That person, I think she's called Halima. She's running as a Workers' Party candidate, has a very good chance of winning, but the RCP has now put this new firebrand young woman into that seat, to run that seat, which a lot of people are criticizing them for. But that's the only other sort of interesting element I might touch then, if you do want to wrap up for tonight.
Yeah, I'm happy to sort of leave it there. And like I say, if time allows it, and obviously time zones allow it, one or both of us should catch up again tomorrow, do a quick 10-minute review, and just see where we are.
Sure. Cool. We'll see you then.
I'll see you all then.